The forest air, thick with the scent of rain and decaying leaves, pressed in on Lily like a physical weight. Each rasping breath was a risk. Somewhere through the relentless curtain of the downpour, a sound, more animalistic than human, a guttural bellow of rage, echoed, followed by the sickening crack of a heavy branch breaking. "Useless bitch, you think you can run from me forever?" The voice, saturated with cheap whiskey and malice, was a familiar soundtrack to her terror. Lily, a wisp of a girl barely 9 years old, pressed herself flatter against the sodden earth beneath a dripping, ancient pine. Her universe had contracted to the frantic thumping of her own heart, the sting of pine needles against her cheek, and the coppery taste of blood from where her lip had split against a tree trunk during her desperate flight. She wasn't just lost. She was hunted. The latest beating for spilling a glass of water had been brutal. He'd promised this time he'd teach her a lesson she wouldn't forget. That lesson, she knew, could be her last. So she ran. It was into this heart of darkness that Elliot Grayson, 50, a self-made billionaire whose real estate empire was a monument to ruthless ambition and profound personal isolation, found himself inexplicably drawn. They called him the eccentric Midas of Manhattan, the ghost of Wall Street. Financial columns celebrated his cold genius, his net worth a constellation of zeros, his skyscrapers piercing the clouds, each a testament to his unyielding will. But these accounts never mentioned the cavernous silence of his Fifth Avenue mansion, a place more mausoleum than home. Its sheer scale, with vast marble floors reflecting empty chandeliers and art-filled corridors that no one but cleaning staff ever traversed, only amplified the desolation. On its grandest wall in his private study hung a single hauntingly blurred photograph of a woman. Her face indistinct, her smile a ghostly suggestion. Perhaps his mother, perhaps a lost love, a spectral anchor to a warmth he barely remembered. He had no family to fill the echoing halls, no laughter, only a gnawing emptiness, and a peculiar afternoon ritual, gazing out at his meticulously sculpted but lifeless garden, searching its barren winter trees for an echo of something irretrievably lost. His vast fortune was a fortress built around a hollow core. That March in Asheville, North Carolina, Elliot was surveying a remote tract of land, the future site of a shelter for orphaned children and abused women. The project was a closely guarded secret, a quiet atonement for a past that clawed at him in the lonely hours. "This will be my penance," he'd once muttered to his long-suffering assistant Daniel Park, a man whose loyalty was as steadfast as his composure. "For the one I couldn't save, for the promises I broke to myself." Now, as a young, eager staffer accompanying the site survey innocently inquired about the lack of publicity, Elliot's gaze, usually as sharp and cold as cut glass, drifted towards the mist-shrouded mountains. "It's merely an old debt," he'd replied, his voice a low murmur. "A debt from a past that still demands its due." The words, cryptic and heavy, silenced further questions. Few knew the man of icy numbers was himself forged in the fires of abandonment, a nameless infant found in a grime-caked dumpster behind a bustling, long-since demolished city market. He vaguely recalled a derelict tenement nearby, a place from his earliest fragmented memories associated with the woman in the photograph, a place that now, decades later, was ironically part of a sprawling commercial development he'd unwittingly financed in his youth through a labyrinthine series of shell corporations, a detail Daniel had once uncovered that had sent a shiver of unease through Elliot. His childhood was a tapestry of institutional gray, of feigned sleep, to mute the cacophony of other children's nightmares, of mornings spent dreading the assessing gaze of adults who always chose someone else. He had clawed his way out of that abyss, his hands metaphorically and literally scarred his resolve, a diamond forged in suffering. But his heart remained a cryogenic chamber, untouched by human warmth. On this particular afternoon, instead of heading back to his waiting car after the survey, an invisible current pulled him down a narrow, muddy path deeper into the forest. The wind. and a mournful sigh through the skeletal branches seemed to whisper forgotten names. Then he heard it. Not the growl of a wild animal, but something far more disturbing, a sharp, broken whimper, abruptly cut short by a sickening thud, like a heavy object striking soft earth, followed by the jarring clank of metal on metal. A cold dread, intimately familiar, coiled in his stomach. He pushed through a dense thicket of rhododendrons, and the wet leaves slapping his face, and the scene that greeted him ripped the breath from his lungs. She was so small, so utterly broken. A gust of wind, it seemed, could scatter her like ashes. Her clothes were torn to filthy shreds, clinging to a frame that was little more than bone and translucent skin. Her hair matted with mud, and what looked like dried blood resembled a ravaged bird's nest. Her skin, where it wasn't bruised a sickening palette of purple and yellow, was the color of old parchment. But it was her eyes that seized Elliot, squeezing his heart in an icy vice. They were wide, vacant, bottomless pits from which every spark of light, every vestige of hope had been brutally extinguished. They were not the eyes of a frightened child, nor a begging one. They were the eyes of a soul that had already departed, leaving only a fragile shell behind. In that ghastly reflection of utter desolation, Elliot saw himself the forgotten boy in the dumpster. The billionaire vanished, replaced by the raw, aching empathy of a fellow survivor. He moved slowly, kneeling beside her, his hand, usually so steady, signing billion-dollar deals, trembling as he reached out. "My child." His voice was a bare whisper, terrified that even the sound of his breath might shatter her. "Can you hear me? Are you still with us?" A guttural snarl ripped through the air from behind him. Well, what have we got here? A goddamn vulture picking at my scraps." Elliot turned slowly. A mountain of a man, unshaven, his face, a roadmap of burst capillaries, lurched from the tree line. He reeked of stale sweat, unwashed clothes, and cheap liquor. A rusty, long-barreled pistol was shoved haphazardly into the waistband of his grimy jeans. "She's mine." The man slurred, his eyes small and cruel, glinting with possessive menace. "Kept whining and crying, so I had to give her a little correction. She ain't gonna die, city slicker. Tougher than she looks." He punctuated his statement by hawking a glob of phlegm near Lily's head. A slow, controlled fury, cold and sharp as a razor, began to uncoil within Elliot. "You left her here, like this." His voice was deceptively soft, almost conversational. "You are her father." The man spat again. "Stepfather. Close enough. And you're way off your shiny paved roads, ain't you? This here's private property. What she needs is discipline, not your goddamn meddling." He took a menacing step closer, his hand hovering near the butt of the pistol. "So why don't you just turn around and get back to your fancy car before you find out what real trouble looks like?" The air crackled with unspoken violence. The rain had turned the narrow path into a slick, treacherous morass. "I'm not leaving her," Elliot stated, his voice now imbued with the unyielding iron that had built his empire. He carefully, gently scooped Lily's feather-light, unnervingly cold body into his arms. She was unresponsive, her breathing terrifyingly shallow. "Hey, what do you think you're doing? That's stealing. Put her down." The stepfather's face contorted with rage, and he yanked the pistol from his waistband, the rusted metal glinting menacingly, even in the storm-dimmed light. He leveled it, albeit unsteadily, at Elliot. "I said put her down, or I'll put a hole in you." Elliot instinctively shielded Lily's inert form with his own body. "You won't touch her again." His mind raced. The man was drunk, unpredictable. Any sudden move could be fatal. From the edge of the clearing, a flash of movement. Daniel Park, Elliot's ever-present assistant, emerged, his face ashen. He'd been waiting by the car, grown uneasy by Elliot's prolonged absence, and had followed his tracks. His eyes widened at the sight of the gun, the beaten child. Mr. Grayson. With surprising swiftness, he ducked behind a broad oak, fumbling for his phone. 911, armed man, child abuse in progress, Blackwood Forest, off Route 74, Surveyor's Trail suspect, is armed, child critical. He hissed into the receiver, his voice sharp and precise, relaying coordinates. The distant approaching wail of sirens cut through the tense standoff. The stepfather's head jerked up. Damn you to hell, who called him? His drunken bravado began to crumble, replaced by a panicked realization. Two police cruisers' lights flashing skidded to a halt at the trail entrance. Officers emerged, hands on their holsters, weapons drawn. Police, drop the weapon, hands. Above your head, no. The stepfather, cursing vilely, reluctantly let the pistol clatter to the muddy ground. His fight was over. One officer rushed to Elliot. Sir, are you harmed? The child. She's alive. Elliot's voice was raw, tight with emotion. But she needs a doctor, immediately. As paramedics carefully transferred Lily to a stretcher, her small, icy hand, smeared with mud and blood, suddenly shot out her tiny fingers, snagging the expensive fabric of Elliot's tailored coat. It was a desperate, fragile anchor in a terrifying storm. Her eyelids fluttered, and for a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, her eyes, though unfocused and clouded with pain, seemed to search for his, conveying an almost unbearable plea, before they closed again. She went limp, a deeper unconsciousness claiming her. Elliot stood frozen, the phantom sensation of her desperate grip seared into his skin. Take her to Mission Hospital. He commanded Daniel, his voice hoarse. The best pediatric trauma team. Spare no expense. I'll follow. Daniel nodded curtly. Already arranging a specialist airlift to the pediatric ICU, sir. And I've initiated contact with our legal team regarding this individual. His gaze flickered with cold disgust towards the apprehended stepfather. Lily, aged 9. The official medical reports when they arrived on Elliot's desk were a brutal litany of human cruelty. Multiple rib fractures, both old and new, some healed grotesquely, pressing against her fragile lungs. Circular keloid scars on the soles of her feet, consistent with repeated burns from a cigarette lighter or similar implement. Severe chronic malnutrition. A pediatrician, his face grim, explained to a stunned Elliot. Her growth is stunted, her organ development compromised. Her stomach has shrunk to the point where she can barely process more than a few mouthfuls. We see this in children from famine-stricken war zones, Mr. Grayson, not in Asheville. A quiet, experienced nurse reviewing Lily's full-body x-rays had to step out of the room, tears streaming down her face. She later confided to Daniel, there isn't a single bone in her body that hasn't been broken or fractured at some point, some repeatedly. And the internal scarring? It's a miracle she's alive. Trauma-induced mutism was the least of it. Her very ability to trust, to connect, to feel safe had been systematically annihilated. An elderly neighbor, when interviewed by detectives, wept openly. I saw the bruises, the rope marks on her wrists. He'd parade her out sometimes, that monster, saying he was training his little bitch pup. I called social services once anonymously. They came, they talked to him. Then they left. She was still there. I should have done more. Her voice dissolved into racking sobs. Lily's biological mother, a woman named Lorna Hart, had reportedly vanished years prior, abandoning her daughter to the mercy of her then-boyfriend, the stepfather, a man known locally for his violent temper and shadowy dealings. Elliot, pacing his sterilely opulent office, felt the meticulously constructed walls of his own emotional fortress begin to crumble. The official police file landed on his desk with a thud. It detailed not only the horrific abuse, but also the stepfather's connections to a broader criminal enterprise. illegal logging, wildlife poaching, and most chillingly, involvement in a transnational human trafficking ring that preyed on vulnerable individuals along the Appalachian corridor. A handwritten addendum from the lead detective caught Elliot's eye. Preliminary indications suggest the child may have been groomed or intended for trafficking. Her stepfather appears to be a low-level operative in a much larger, more sinister network. We are looking into connections to several unsolved disappearances in the region. That line was a detonator. Elliot had witnessed corporate savagery betrayals for power lives ruined by greed. But this calculated systemic dehumanization of a child, potentially for the most heinous of purposes, was a depth of depravity he hadn't fathomed. It touched a raw nerve, a dim, disquieting memory of hushed, fearful conversations overheard in his earliest years, shadowy figures lurking at the periphery of his mother's troubled life. While the stepfather was swiftly arrested and faced a mountain of charges that would likely see him imprisoned for decades, the media circus erupted. "Billionaire rescues tortured forest girl," screamed at the headlines. Elliot, repulsed, retreated further into his shell. His sole focus became Lily. Daniel provided daily updates from the hospital, each one a small, agonizing stab. Did she eat today? Any response to the nurses? Has she made any sound? For weeks, the answers were a monotonous, heartbreaking series of gentle headshakes. Lily remained a silent, haunted ghost in a hospital bed. Until one dreary afternoon, as Elliot was sifting through projections for the shelter, now imbued with a desperate personal urgency, Daniel entered his study, a small crumpled piece of paper held gingerly in his hand. "This came from the art therapist working with Lily, sir. She made it for you." Elliot unfolded it. The drawing was crude, the pencil lines blurred by what might have been tears or raindrops. A stick figure of a small girl stood drenched in a crayon downpour. Beside her, a larger, faceless stick figure was depicted carefully placing a coat over her shoulders. In the distance, a rudimentary house glowed with yellow, welcoming windows and an open door. Elliot's breath caught in his throat. The paper slipped from his numb fingers. That night, sleep was a torment. He dreamt he was 7 again, a nameless, shivering boy huddled beneath the leaky awning of a derelict bus stop in a forgotten part of the city. Rain lashed his face, each drop a tiny icicle. A man in a fine coat walked by, paused, looked directly at him, and then continued on, disappearing into the swirling darkness, leaving the boys utterly alone. Elliot jolted awake, his heart hammering, his shirt soaked in cold sweat. The ambient glow of the city skyline through his penthouse window made the opulent room seem to tremble with him. "No," he rasped into the darkness, his voice hoarse with a sudden fierce conviction. "Not again. Not another child. If I once wished for a savior for someone, anyone to have stopped for that boy, then now I will be that someone." He was on his feet, dialing Daniel before the first rays of dawn touched the city. "Daniel, initiate adoption proceedings. Expedite everything. We're bringing Lily home." "Consider it done, Mr. Grayson." Daniel replied, his voice calm, but with an undertone of deep approval. "I've already taken the liberty of researching the best child adoption lawyers in the state." The legalities were expedited with the ruthless efficiency of Elliot's wealth. He signed the documents without reading them, each stroke of the pen a silent vow, forged in the crucible of shared desolation. The journey to the mansion was a silent one. Lily sat in the back of the Rolls-Royce, clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit given to her by a kindly nurse. Her eyes still wide and haunted, fixed on the passing cityscape as if it were an alien planet. Elliot's house, a testament to worldly success, felt colder and more imposing than ever. Lily's room, meticulously prepared by Daniel under the guidance of Maria Elliott's warm-hearted, intuitive housekeeper in soft pastels and filled with an army of plush, silent companions, was a stark, almost cruel contrast to the dark, damp basement corner that had been her prison. Yet in the vastness of the mansion, they were two isolated shadows. Elliot retreated to his study. The connecting door to Lily's suite often left ajar the faint sounds from her room. The rustle of pages, a stifled cough, a fragile thread in the oppressive silence. He found himself watching the security monitor feed from her room, not to supervise, but simply to reassure himself that she was still there. A small, curled figure by the window, often just staring out the stuffed rabbit, her only confidant. He didn't know how to reach her. Words felt clumsy, intrusive. He understood wounds. He knew that touching them ineptly only made them bleed more profusely. Every evening he cooked dinner himself, a skill he was clumsily relearning. Simple, nourishing food, warm cream of tomato soup, freshly baked bread, sometimes a hard-boiled egg, which he once attempted to shape disastrously into a rabbit. He'd never cooked for anyone but himself, his sustenance usually a tray delivered by silent staff. Now his hands, accustomed to wielding power, were learning to season not just with salt and pepper, but with the aching longing of a child who had once craved a meal not delivered with a snarl or a blow. He would knock lightly on her door, placing the tray outside. "Lily," he'd say, his voice oddly tentative. "I've made some food, if you're hungry." There was never a verbal reply. Only after he'd retreated would the door creak open a fraction, a small trembling hand darting out to retrieve the tray. She ate little, a few spoonfuls of soup, a nibble of bread, then left the tray exactly where she'd found it. Elliot would quietly collect it, his heart growing heavier with each silent, untouched offering. Her door never slammed, but in his mind, it echoed with the finality of a prison lock from his own childhood. One night around 3 a.m., thirst drew him from his restless sleep to the cavernous kitchen. He stopped dead in the doorway. Bathed in the soft, spectral glow of the under-cabinet lighting, Lily was curled up on one of the cold steel breakfast stools, her knees drawn to her chest, the stuffed rabbit clutched tight. Her eyes were closed, but her long lashes were spangled with fresh tears. He didn't speak, didn't move to comfort her. He understood this silent grief. It was a language he knew too well. He simply poured a glass of milk, warmed it slightly in the microwave, and placed it on the counter beside her, a quiet, unobtrusive offering. Some children are so accustomed to the cold, they don't dare believe in the genuine warmth of a stranger's kindness. And some adults who once craved that warmth with every fiber of their being, when finally given the chance to offer it, do so with every fractured piece of their heart. Then came the afternoon storm, the rain lashing against the mansion's bulletproof windows like angry fists. Elliot was in his study, ostensibly reviewing a complex merger proposal, but his mind was adrift, lost in a gray fog of memory. A faint sound from the hallway, hesitant footsteps, the soft plink, plink, plink of water dripping onto the polished oak floor, pierced his reverie. He followed the sound, his heart inexplicably quickening, and froze at the entrance to the mudroom. Lily, soaked to the bone, her thin dress plastered to her even thinner frame, was cradling a tiny, shivering creature in her arms. It was a scrawny, stray puppy, no bigger than her two hands, clasped together, its fur spiked and matted with mud and rain. Its eyes dull with a resigned despair. She hadn't seen him. She crouched, pulling an old threadbare towel from a battered backpack Elliot hadn't known she possessed, and began to gently, painstakingly wipe the puppy's soaked fur. Her movements were slow, infinitely tender, yet imbued with a strange urgency, as if every wasted second might steal the creature's last spark of warmth. She carefully arranged an old discarded sweater of hers into a makeshift nest on the cold tile floor, then fumbled in her backpack again, retrieving a piece of dried sausage, its edges gnawed. This she gently, patiently tried to press against the puppy's lips. And then she whispered, her voice so low it was almost part of the rain's murmur. "Don't bark, please. Here. Quiet means safe. It means survival." Elliot heard it all. He took an involuntary step forward. The ancient floorboard beneath his feet creaked a mournful protest. Lily startled violently, whirling around, her eyes, no longer vacant but wide with a raw animalistic panic, fixed on him. She instantly threw herself in front of the puppy, her small arms outstretched protectively, her tiny frame trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. Are you going to send him away?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it shook with such intensity it seemed it might shatter into 1,000 pieces and dissolve into the storm-laden air outside. Elliot looked from the terrified girl to the pitiful whimpering dog. Its eyes, wide and dark, mirrored Lily's on that first day in the forest. Not begging for salvation, just pleading with a silent, heartbreaking dignity not to be hurt. A heavy sigh escaped him, the sound ragged. The rigid lines of his face, usually set in an expression of controlled neutrality, seemed to soften to fracture. I don't want any more trouble in this house, Lily." The words were meant to be gentle, reassuring, but in the charged atmosphere they landed with the chilling finality of a judge's sentence. Lily's head drooped, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Her arms, however, remained protectively around the puppy. Elliot turned a familiar ache of inadequacy tightening his chest. He started to walk away, but before he reached the doorway, the soft, steady voice of Maria, his compassionate housekeeper, who had taken a quiet, motherly interest in Lily, stopped him. "Mr. Grayson," she said, her tone respectful but firm. "Forgive me, sir. Years ago, my own sister found a wounded dove. Our father, a hard man, wanted to dispose of it. But she nursed it, and that small act of kindness, sir, it softened him in ways we never imagined. Sometimes the only thing that can bridge two very broken hearts isn't even human at all. Sometimes it's a shared kindness for something even more broken." He stood motionless for a long moment, Maria's words echoing in the sudden silence. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out. But a part of him, a part he hadn't known was still capable of feeling, remained behind, massed in that cold mudroom with the girl and the dying puppy. That night, the vast professional-grade kitchen, usually a domain of silent, efficient staff, glowed with the warm, buttery light of the antique brass pendant lamp over the central island. Elliot, his shirt sleeves rolled up his tie. Discarded, stood awkwardly by the AGA stove, holding a clean, fluffy towel and a bowl of steaming, freshly warmed milk. He had no idea if the tiny creature downstairs would drink it, or even if it was still alive. But a vivid, unbidden memory surged, a cold, cavernous orphanage dormitory, the gnawing ache of hunger so profound it had surpassed tears. A stooped, elderly kitchen worker, whose name he never knew, had pressed a chipped mug of warm, sweet milk into his trembling 7-year-old hands. She hadn't spoken, hadn't even looked at him directly. But the unexpected warmth, the sustenance, had been a lifeline, a flicker of humanity in an otherwise brutal world. He carried the tray carefully down to the ground-floor laundry room, a place he rarely visited now, a makeshift animal hospital. The door was ajar. Light from the hallway spilled in, illuminating a scene that made his chest ache. Lily was curled in a corner, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, the tiny puppy nestled against her chest, its breathing shallow, but miraculously steady. Shadow, they would later call him. Elliot didn't knock. He simply knelt and placed the tray on the cold, tiled floor. The warm milk, the dry towel, no words. As he rose to leave, Lily looked up. For the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't flinch, didn't avert her gaze. She looked directly at him, her eyes clear and deep in the dim light, holding his for a long, breathless moment. There was no smile, But in that shared gaze, something shifted like a rusted lock, finally giving way. A door creaking open, just enough to let a sliver of unexpected light penetrate a lifetime of darkness. A few days later, Elliot was passing the formal living room, a vast, unused space filled with priceless antiques and an air of perpetual twilight. He hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but a soft, hesitant murmur from within caught his ear, making him pause. "You have to be good, Shadow." Lily was whispering, her voice barely above a breath as she stroked the now slightly less scrawny puppy. "Remember, if you eat too much or make too much noise or bother anyone, they'll throw you out. Just like me. Just like me." The childishly spoken words, so matter-of-fact in their tragic acceptance, struck Elliot with the force of a physical blow. He strode into the room, his sudden appearance making Lily flinch violently. She instinctively snatched Shadow closer, her eyes darting to the floor, a familiar posture of terrified subservience. Never look an adult in the eye. Never speak first. Never draw attention. Survival lessons etched in scars. Elliot didn't loom over her. Instead, he slowly, deliberately knelt on the Persian rug, maintaining a careful distance, his movements telegraphing a desire not to frighten, but to understand. "Lily." His voice was low, gentle, an invitation. You eat so little, you stay so quiet, because you're afraid I'll throw you out too." Silence. Then after a long, agonizing pause, a barely perceptible nod. Her voice, when it came, was a thready whisper, each word seeming to cost her an immense effort. "Before, if I ate too much bread, or if I cried when he hit me, my stepfather, he locked me in the cellar. No lights, no water. Sometimes for days. Once, just because I dropped a glass of water, he..." Her voice trailed off, her small body trembling. Elliot closed his eyes, a wave of profound, suffocating rage washing over him, followed by an equally profound sorrow. He couldn't speak immediately. His hand pressed against the rich carpet, as if to anchor himself against the weight of her innocent, unbearable testimony. "Lily." He finally managed his own voice, hoarse, thick, with unshed tears. "No one here will ever throw you away. Not for eating, not for speaking, not for dropping 1,000 glasses. Your stepfather, he was a monster. He was wrong. You should eat whatever you want. Say whatever you feel. Laugh, cry, make noise. This is your home now." He took a ragged breath. I was abandoned too, Lily." He confessed, the words costing him more than any billion-dollar deal. "When I was very small, left in an orphanage without even a name. No one remembered my birthday. No one wanted to hold me. No one waited for me. I grew up learning to hide my tears and to teach myself never to hope." Slowly, tentatively, Lily lifted her head. Her clear, startlingly intelligent eyes, no longer veiled by fear, met his. They shimmered, not with terror now, but with a dawning, incredulous understanding, something raw and deeply resonant, an unspoken recognition between two souls who had navigated the same abyss. So you were locked up too." The question was a whisper, more a statement of dawning comprehension than an inquiry. Elliot nodded, a painful lump forming in his throat. "Yes, but not in a cellar. I was locked inside my own heart, Lily, and it took me a very long time to even begin to find the key." They sat in a comfortable silence for a while, the opulent room for once not feeling so cold, so empty. Then Lily's voice, soft as a moth's wing, floated into the space. I think," she said, tilting her head, her gaze distant, "I think you're like like the little crack of light under the door of my old room, the dark room in the basement. Elliot frowned, puzzled. Lily continued, her voice gaining a fragile confidence. It was tiny, and mostly it was always dark. But sometimes if I stared at it long enough, I could see a little light. Just a little bit. But it was enough. Enough to let me know that outside that door there was something different. Something not dark. He froze. A shiver traced its way down his spine, not from cold, but from the profound, unexpected impact of her words. The sheer, unadorned poetry of her perception, born from unimaginable suffering, was a revelation. This child, rescued from the depths of depravity, was now in her own innocent way, showing him where the light had always been, just beyond the self-imposed prison of his own heart. He wanted to speak, to offer comfort, reassurance, but words failed him. Instead, in that fragile, incandescent moment, Elliot Grayson understood. The child before him wasn't just a victim he was saving. She was in turn saving him, gently, painstakingly patching together the dormant, shattered pieces of his soul that had long forgotten how to beat for anything or anyone beyond the relentless pursuit of more. Slowly, a faint, unaccustomed smile touched the corners of Elliot's lips. His eyes no longer the guarded, assessing gaze of the billionaire, nor even the weary eyes of a fellow survivor, softened with a new tender light. They were the eyes of a man, making a silent, sacred promise, one he had never dared to contemplate before. "I'll get you out of that cage, Lily." He said, his voice a low, fervent vow, not just by opening the door, but by taking your hand and running as fast as we can. We'll run to a place where no one will ever shout at you again, where no one will punish you for being a child, a place where you are allowed to exist, to make noise, to laugh, until your sides ache. Lily didn't answer, but she nodded, a slow, careful movement, as if daring for the first time to allow herself to believe. In her arms, Shadow the puppy sighed contentedly in his sleep. Between them, in the opulent, sun-dappled room, something profound and irrevocable had been forged, stronger than any legal document, more binding than any contract. Just as this delicate, tentative bloom of trust and affection began to unfurl, a sleek, menacingly black limousine purred to a halt at the imposing wrought-iron gates of the Grayson estate. The passenger door opened, and a woman emerged, a figure of such stark, predatory glamour, she seemed to drain the very sunlight from the spring morning. Her platinum blonde hair was sculpted into an elaborate architectural coiffure. Her body was encased in a form-fitting black dress that seemed to absorb the light, her lips a gash of violent, bloody red. Her eyes, the color of glacial ice, held a weary, knowing cynicism that made one instinctively shiver. There was no maternal softness in her posture, no hesitation, only an aura of cold, calculated intent. It was Lorna Hart, Lily's biological mother, a ghost conjured from a nightmare Lily had almost succeeded in erasing. Years. How many? No phone calls, no letters, no cheap birthday trinkets, not a single whispered, "I love you." In Lily's fractured memory, her mother was a fleeting, acrid scent of stale perfume and cigarette smoke. The echo of shrill, drunken laughter and endless, terrifying nights swallowed in darkness, with no hand to hold, no comforting presence. Yet today, she stood there, a phantom made flesh, outside the gates Elliot had naively believed were an unbreachable fortress around Lily's fragile new world. In Lorna's manicured hand was a thick, ostentatious, leather-bound folder. On her lips, a smile so counterfeit, so brittle, it seemed it might crack and shatter. "Mr. Grayson, I presume?" Her voice a husky, theatrical drawl. "I'm Lorna Hart, Lily's mother." She emphasized the word with a proprietorial air. "And I've come to take my daughter back." It was spoken as if she were reclaiming a misplaced, albeit valuable piece of luggage. Elliot didn't move from the grand stone portico. His hand resting on the carved newel post gripped it so tightly his knuckles blanched. It wasn't anger that paralyzed him, not yet. It was a sudden, sickening wave of fear, a primal, visceral dread that no amount of money, no degree of power could ever truly banish. The helpless terror of confronting the cold, indifferent, and often corrupt machinery of the law, especially when wielded by someone so transparently predatory. Lorna tilted her head, a smirk playing on her lips, her gaze openly contemptuous, raking over him over the imposing facade of the mansion. She chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "The tabloids are having a field day, aren't they? Billionaire savior adopts tortured orphan. A real-life fairy tale." She gave a theatrical, dismissive shrug. "Too bad, Mr. Grayson. All fairy tales must come to an end, and this one ends with me taking what's mine." Elliot forced his voice to remain steady, though his eyes darkened like a gathering thunderhead. "You're not here for Lily," he stated, his tone icily calm. "You abandoned her years ago. You're here because she's suddenly valuable. Fame by association, public sympathy, lucrative television interviews, donations to the Grieving Mother Fund. You see a child not as a daughter, but as a commodity." Lorna laughed again, the sound brittle like breaking glass, echoing unpleasantly in the manicured courtyard. "So what if I do, She spat, her carefully constructed composure cracking to reveal the ugliness beneath. "Who are you to lecture me on motherhood, Grayson? Some lonely, pathetic old billionaire trying to buy a child's affection with your filthy money, because no one else will have you. You think a judge will side with a stranger over a natural mother who simply fell on hard times and made a mistake she now deeply regrets. I have rights, Mr. Grayson, parental rights." Each word was a poisoned dart aimed with vicious precision. But Elliot didn't react to the barbs. His focus, his entire being, was centered on the small, trembling figure who had crept out from behind him, drawn by the raised voices. Lily, who had only just rediscovered the shape of a smile, who had only just dared to lift her face to the warmth of the sun without flinching, was now trembling like a sapling in a gale. She instinctively sought refuge behind Elliot, her small hands gripping the fabric of his trousers, retreating step by agonizing step, until she was almost completely hidden. Her voice, when it came, was a choked, desperate sob, barely audible. "No. No, I don't want to go. I don't want to live with her. Please, Uncle Elliot, please don't let her take me. Please." Each whispered plea was a fresh incision in Elliot's already bleeding heart. He didn't think. He didn't strategize. He simply reacted, kneeling swiftly, pulling the terrified child into his arms, holding her with a fierce, protective tenderness that surprised even himself, as if by sheer force of will he could shield her from the world's cruelty. "Lily, listen to me," he murmured, his voice thick with a potent cocktail of rage and anguish. "You are not going anywhere. I promise you. You are safe here." His words trembled as much as his hands, raw and stripped bare of the customary armor of wealth and power he had worn for so long. Above them, Lorna remained unmoved, a statue of cold indifference, her smile sharpening into a victorious, predatory sneer. "Oh, we'll see about that, Grayson," she hissed, her voice dripping venom. "The courts will decide, and blood, as they say, is thicker than whatever this pathetic arrangement is. I have already petitioned for immediate temporary custody." She spun on her stiletto heel, her black dress swirling around her like a malevolent shadow, the sharp, rhythmic click of her heels on the flagstones striking Elliot's chest like hammer blows. The limousine's engine started with a low, menacing growl. Then it rolled away, leaving behind a trail of exhaust fumes and a suffocating, palpable dread that seeped into every brick, every shadow, every breath within the suddenly vulnerable sanctuary of the Grayson estate. In Elliot's arms, Lily continued to sob, her small hands clinging desperately to his jacket, as if it were the last piece of solid ground in a world rapidly crumbling around her. Elliot knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the real battle had only just begun. The courtroom was a sterile, impersonal arena, its atmosphere thick with unspoken anxieties and the cloying scent of desperation. Harsh, fluorescent light fell indiscriminately upon the faces of two figures sitting side by side, a little girl with hair hastily brushed but eyes swollen and red from days of crying, and a man whose broad shoulders, usually so unyielding, now trembled with a barely suppressed tremor. On the other side, Lorna Hart, resplendent in a demure dove-gray suit that screamed calculated victimhood, dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes, with a lace handkerchief occasionally casting a look of mournful maternal longing towards Lily that made Elliot's stomach churn. Beside Lorna sat her slick, overly confident lawyer, and a woman introduced as Dr. Evelyn Thorne, a child psychologist, with impeccable credentials whose smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Elliot's lawyer argued passionately about the abandonment, the abuse, the clear trauma Lily had suffered. But Lorna's lawyer countered, "My client was in a desperate situation, manipulated by an abusive partner. She never stopped loving her daughter. She has reformed her life and offers a stable, loving home. Furthermore, Dr. Thorne's preliminary assessment indicates the child may be suffering from undue influence, perhaps even a form of capture bonding with Mr. Grayson, who, however well-intentioned, is still a stranger." Dr. Thorne then took the stand, her voice smooth and authoritative, detailing how children in traumatic situations can form artificial attachments, and how Lily's aversion to her mother was a classic sign of needing reintegration with her primary caregiver. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation, and Elliot felt a cold dread seep into his bones. Then, in the cold, lifeless room, the judge's voice, as flat and emotionless as the legal statutes he upheld, rang out, extinguishing the last flickering ember of hope in Elliot's heart. After careful consideration of all presented evidence, and recognizing the paramount legal precedent of biological parentage, and the testimony of Dr. Thorne concerning the complexities of trauma bonding temporary custody of the minor child, Lily Rose Hart will be awarded to her biological mother, Ms. Lorna Hart, pending further review and psychological evaluation of all parties over the next 4 weeks. The gavel struck the sounding block with a soft, almost anticlimactic thud. But in Elliot's soul it was the deafening crash of thunder, the shattering of a fragile nascent dream. Lily didn't fully comprehend the legal jargon, the nuanced complexities of custody law, but she understood one thing with terrifying, gut-wrenching clarity. She was being torn away, ripped from the only safe harbor, the only loving arms she had ever known in her short, brutal life. She turned to Elliot, tears already welling, spilling, carving hot tracks down her pale cheeks, her small voice trembling so violently it was barely intelligible. They're lying, aren't they, Uncle Elliot? I don't have to go, do I? I can stay with you, right? Elliot opened his mouth, but his throat felt as if it were filled with crushed glass. Words, any words lodged there, choking him. He could only clutch her small, cold hand tighter, his knuckles white, his own vision blurring. I'm your child, right? Lily's voice cracked the sound, like a delicate porcelain doll shattering on a stone floor. You said I was yours." She buried her face in his suit jacket. "You promised." Elliot bowed his head, the sheer, crushing weight of his helplessness suffocating him. He wanted to scream, to rail against the injustice, to offer every penny of his vast fortune, his power, his very life, just to keep her safe, to keep her with him. Lily? No. Suddenly, all Elliot's composure, his carefully maintained facade of billionaire stoicism, crumbled. He lurched to his feet. His voice, when it finally broke free, was ragged, desperate, addressing the judge, the courtroom, the indifferent universe. "Please, Your Honor, reconsider this woman." She abandoned her. For years, Dr. Thorne's assessment is, it cannot be accurate. There must be something, some way. The man, who always appeared impregnable, reserved, was now visibly trembling, his hands clasped in an unconscious gesture of supplication. His eyes, those famously icy eyes, now shimmering with unshed tears. "I don't need a mother." Lily wailed, her voice rising in a thin, desperate crescendo of childish grief and terror, clinging tighter to Elliot. "I just need you. Please, I only need Elliot. Just... Dad. Dad." The word, uttered for the first time in the crucible of this agonizing separation, was a spear through Elliot's heart. It was so precious, so heart-wrenching, like a tiny flickering candle flame caught in a hurricane, extinguished before it even had a chance to truly shine. "Oh God, Lily, I know." Elliot choked out his own tears, now flowing freely, unabashedly. "I know, sweetheart. But I can't. They won't let me keep you. Not right now. You promised you'd be my dad. You promised you'd keep me safe." Her accusations, born of pure, unadulterated terror, were more painful than any physical blow. "If only it were that simple, my love." Elliot whispered, his voice thick, his eyes red and raw. If only love was enough to conquer the world. A stern-faced social worker, her expression a mixture of pity and professional detachment, approached. Lily recoiled, as if struck, pressing herself further against Elliot, her eyes wide with animalistic panic. "No, don't take me, please, Daddy, don't let them." Lorna, behind the social worker, allowed a flicker of cold, triumphant satisfaction to cross her face. "Come now, Lily," she cooed, her voice laced with an icy sweetness that failed to mask the steel beneath. "I'm your mother, and you don't get to choose. You've been a very naughty girl listening to this man. But Mommy will fix you. We have a cozy new apartment, just you and me." Elliot stood abruptly, his body rigid, with a sudden impotent fury. "Don't you dare speak to her like that," he roared, his voice cracking. "She's not bad. She's a child. She just needs love, something you clearly know nothing about." But his words were drowned out by the rustle of official papers, the heavy footsteps of perceived duty, the inexorable march of a reality he was powerless to halt. Lily was gently but firmly pried from his arms, her small hands grasping, then slipping from his. She was led out of the courtroom, her head turning with every step, her tear-ravaged face a mask of utter desolation, her lips quivering, trying to form words, pleas that were lost in her choking sobs. Her gaze remained locked on Elliot, a silent, shattering accusation, until the heavy oak door finally swung shut, severing their connection. Elliot felt as if his spine had been surgically removed. He collapsed back into the hard wooden chair, his body leaden, his eyes staring blankly at the closed door, seeing nothing, feeling everything. Daniel placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "This isn't over, Elliot. Not by a long shot. We fight. We find a way." His voice was low and tense. That psychologist, Dr. Thorne. Her credentials felt too perfect. I'm having her background scrutinized right now. And Lorna Hart's new cozy apartment. We'll be watching. That night, Elliot returned to the mansion, not as its master, but as a ghost haunting its gilded cage. The opulent rooms, once merely silent, now echoed with an unbearable emptiness. The small, plush armchair in the library, where Lily used to curl up with shadow and picture books, still bore the faint, heartbreaking indentation of her small frame. The cheerful pink plastic cup she used every morning for her juice still sat in the drying rack by the kitchen sink, unwashed, a forgotten relic. Elliot wandered aimlessly through the vast, empty spaces, each room a fresh torment, a reminder of what he had briefly held and so brutally lost. He stopped as if physically struck in front of the west wall of the sunroom, a space Lily had claimed as her own. There, rendered in vibrant, clumsy strokes of wax crayon, was her final masterpiece, a drawing of a tall man with telltale salt and pepper hair holding the hand of a small, brightly smiling girl. A huge, lopsided red heart encompassed them both. Beneath the drawing, in shaky, painstaking block letters, Lily had printed her first complete sentence: "My frest FM lie, I love my dad." The crayons lay scattered on the floor where she'd dropped them. Elliot sank to his knees, his hand tracing the waxy outline of the smiling girl, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. In the days that followed, Elliot moved through his life like an automaton. He attended meetings, signed documents, issued directives. But his spirit remained in that courtroom, watching Lily being led away. He managed through Daniel's discreet inquiries to ascertain Lily's whereabouts. A grim, state-subsidized apartment Lorna had hastily secured. Daniel's preliminary report on Dr. Thorne already indicated several past instances of questionable testimony in custody battles, always favoring the wealthier or more connected party. Lorna's finances were also a murky mess. Elliot drove by sometimes late at night, parking in the shadows across the street, staring up at the dingy, curtained window he knew was hers, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He didn't dare approach, didn't dare make contact. He was terrified that if they faced each other again, the pain for both of them, the impossible longing, would only deepen, would become an open, unhealable wound. His lawyers were working appealing the temporary custody, but the legal process was a slow grinding machine, and Elliot was drowning in a sea of helplessness. 1 month later, a particularly savage late-autumn storm clawed at the city. Rain driven by hurricane-force winds battered the Grayson Mansion's reinforced windows, the sound like a fusillade of icy bullets. The sky was a churning, bruised void, periodically ripped asunder by jagged bolts of lightning and the ensuing thunder, a visceral, earth-shaking roar. In the grand, dimly lit living room, Elliot sat alone, a solitary, diminished figure, dwarfed by the leaping, distorted shadows dancing across the towering walls. The massive stone fireplace crackled embers glowing like malevolent eyes, painting the room in a fitful, infernal light. But inside Elliot, a glacial tundra reigned, a frozen desolation no flame could ever thaw. On the polished mahogany coffee table, a small chipped porcelain cup, patterned with cheerful yellow ducks, Lily's favorite, remained untouched, a silent, reproachful monument to her absence. Elliot hadn't had the heart to move it, to wash it, to erase her lingering presence. He sat there, his eyes glassy, unfocused, staring out through the misted, rain-lashed windows into the merciless, howling night, his lips moving, whispering into the maelstrom. Where is she now? Who's holding her hand? Is she terrified of the thunder alone in the dark? His voice was a hoarse, broken rasp, barely audible above the storm, as if afraid to disturb the fragile, dying ember of hope that still inexplicably clung to his ravaged heart. The loneliness in the room thickened with every passing, agonizing minute, stretching into something almost tangible, a suffocating, palpable entity. Then, cutting through the relentless, deafening roar of the wind and rain, a sudden, frantic, desperate pounding echoed from the massive front gates, so urgent, so violent, it seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Elliot jerked upright, his heart leaping into his throat. He was on his feet in an instant. Frowning deeply, a surge of inexplicable adrenaline coursing through him as he hurried, almost ran towards the main entrance, the hem of his cashmere robe trailing forgotten behind him. As he stepped out onto the covered stone portico, shielded from the direct onslaught of the storm, he squinted through the blinding, near-horizontal sheets of rain. There, barely visible through the tempestuous curtain of water, illuminated in ghostly flashes by the distant, flickering street lights and the violent strokes of lightning, was a small, impossibly fragile, trembling figure clinging to the cold, unyielding iron of the gates. Lily. Her hair, no longer brushed and shining, hung in wet, tangled, seaweed-like strands across her bruised and tear-streaked face. Her thin, once pink dress was torn filthy and plastered to her emaciated, shivering frame. She was clutching Shadow the little puppy now, a bony, bedraggled creature, tightly against her chest. The dog, soaked through, was shivering so violently, it seemed its tiny bones might shatter from the cold. The sight of her, this spectral, broken apparition, nearly knocked the air from Elliot's lungs, striking him with the force of a physical blow. Her bare feet, stark white against the black, rain-slicked asphalt of the driveway, were bloodied, lacerated, caked with mud and gravel. Her knees were scraped raw, bleeding freely. Her lips, usually a soft rose, had turned a terrifying, dangerous shade of blue. Her eyes swollen, almost shut, nearly lost beneath fresh, livid bruises, lifted to meet his. And in their depths, he saw desperation, so pure, so absolute, it shattered whatever remaining fragments of strength or composure he possessed. "Daddy." She rasped, her voice cracked, broken, almost lost in the howl of the wind. "Daddy, I ran away. She started drinking again. And her boyfriend, they hit me. They locked Shadow in the cold shed. I missed you. I had to come home." Each word was a tiny, exquisitely sharp blade twisting in Elliot's already flayed heart. He could do nothing but stand there for a single, paralyzed heartbeat, feeling his world tilt, then shatter, then miraculously, agonizingly begin to reassemble itself around this one precious, battered child. Without a second thought, without a conscious decision, he sprinted through the torrential rain, oblivious to the icy needles stinging his face, the wind tearing at his clothes. He fell to his knees on the wet, unforgiving asphalt before her, his arms flinging open in an involuntary, all-encompassing gesture of desperate welcome. "Lily, oh God, Lily, my child. My brave, brave girl." He choked out the words, his voice thick, broken by tears he no longer tried or even wanted to hold back. She collapsed against him, her entire body as cold and fragile as ancient, shattered porcelain. He wrapped his arms around her, fiercely pulling her close, so close as if trying to absorb her pain, her cold, her terror into his own body, as if afraid she might dissolve, might slip away again into the raging darkness. "I'm so sorry, Lily. I'm so sorry. I didn't protect you. I promised I would keep you safe. And I let you fall back into that hell. Forgive me, my darling. Forgive me." His words were broken, fragmented, drowning in the roar of the storm and in the crushing, merciless guilt that clawed at his chest. Still trembling uncontrollably in his arms, her small body racked with violent shivers, Lily sobbed against his shoulder, her cold, wet cheek pressed against his neck. They locked the door every night. I had to climb the big fence. In the back, it had pointy bits. I fell, but I kept thinking, if I could just get here. If I died. I thought maybe if I died it would at least be on the way back home. To you. She whispered each syllable, a fresh, agonizing dagger twisting deeper into Elliot's soul. He squeezed her tighter, feeling the immeasurable weight of every moment she had suffered alone, every terrifying mile she had crawled barefoot and bleeding through the hostile, storm-tossed city just to find her way back to him, her only beacon in an endless night. With a surge of desperate strength, he lifted her into his arms, cradling her as easily as if she were an infant, and turned back towards the towering, reassuring silhouette of the mansion. Each step was heavy with the terrifying realization that he had almost lost her forever, that she had almost perished in her desperate flight to safety. Lily, barely conscious now, her head lolling against his shoulder, murmured through cracked, blue-tinged lips, "Daddy, can I stay this time? Please, can I stay home?" Inside the vast, echoing entrance hall, he strode purposefully towards the living room, ignoring the trails of water soaking into the priceless antique rugs from their drenched forms, ignoring Daniel and Maria, who had rushed out, their faces etched with alarm and dawning comprehension. "This is your home, Lily girl," he said, his voice fierce, unwavering, a raw, powerful vow that resonated through the storm-tossed house, a promise sealed in shared desperation and unbreakable love. "This is your home, and I swear to you on my very life, I will never let anyone take you away from me again. Never." Gently, reverently, he sat her down on the thick plush rug before the now roaring fireplace, which Daniel had wisely stoked to a blazing inferno. He began carefully, tenderly to strip away her sodden, filthy rags, wrapping her in the softest, thickest cashmere blankets he could find. Shadow, too, was gently toweled dry by Maria and nestled beside her, pressing his shivering body against her side, letting out a faint, exhausted whimper, as if sharing her profound relief and utter depletion. The fire crackled warmly, its dancing light casting flickering golden patterns across Lily's battered, bruised, but finally safe form. She didn't resist, didn't even flinch. She simply leaned into his touch, into the blessed warmth, letting herself be swaddled, cared for, loved, for the first time, in what must have felt like an eternity of cold and terror. Within moments, utter exhaustion, both physical and emotional, overtook her, and she drifted into a deep, profound sleep, her breathing shallow, but even her small, bruised face finally blessedly free of fear. Elliot knelt beside her for a long, long time, his hands hovering over the cuts, the bruises, the myriad marks of cruelty that marred her small frame, aching with a desperate, impotent desire to heal them, to erase them. Terrified even to brush his fingers against her fragile skin, lest he cause her more pain. For the first time in weeks, Lily slept in peace, a fragile, precious blossom rescued from a killing frost. And beside her, Elliot Grayson remained a silent, vigilant sentinel, his heart cracked wide open, his soul reforged in the crucible of that night's terror and ultimate redemption, vowing silently, with every fiber of his being, that no storm, no court, no power, no force on earth would ever take his daughter away from him again. Driven by a cold, unyielding fury and a desperate fatherly love, Elliot unleashed the full formidable force of his wealth and influence. Daniel, working tirelessly, coordinated a team of the world's best private investigators, former intelligence operatives, and forensic accountants. "Daniel," Elliot commanded, his voice like steel, "Dr. Thorne is compromised. Find out who paid her. Lorna Hart is not merely a neglectful mother who made a mistake. Her eyes held something predatory. Dig into her, every corner of her life, her associates, her finances, her past." The detective's note about trafficking. Lily was groomed. "This is fouler than just maternal greed. I need to know everything." He also remembered that unsettling connection to the old tenement property. "And Daniel, look into that old development project of mine, the one near the market. See if there were any reported incidents, any criminal activity flagged back then. There's a shadow there, a darkness I can't shake." The investigators fanned out. Daniel's team quickly confirmed Dr. Thorne had received a substantial, untraceable payment just before her testimony. Lorna Hart's official records were suspiciously sparse, almost too clean for someone supposedly struggling. Then a breakthrough from an investigator who'd covertly gained access to Lorna's now-abandoned apartment under a carefully managed pretext. Tucked beneath a loose floorboard wrapped in oilcloth was a small, battered tin box. Inside, amongst some cheap jewelry and old letters, was a faded hospital bracelet. The name printed on it, Anya Sharma. Beside it, a tiny tarnished silver charm shaped like a 5-pointed star, and a creased, yellowed newspaper clipping reporting a baby girl missing from a neighboring state almost 3 decades prior. Elliot's blood ran cold when Daniel presented the findings. He remembered with a sudden jolting clarity seeing a tiny, uniquely star-shaped birthmark on Lily's left wrist. He'd noticed it one evening when she'd fallen asleep in the library, her small hand draped over the armrest of her chair. At the time, he dismissed it as a faint, pretty mark. Now it blazed in his memory with terrifying significance. Lorna Hart, the investigators further discovered, had no verifiable birth records of her own prior to appearing in Asheville some 15 years ago with a young child she claimed was her daughter. Her entire maternal identity, her legal claim to Lily, was a monstrous, elaborate fabrication. Lily wasn't Lorna Hart's daughter. Lily, or rather Anya Sharma, was a stolen child her true parents, a loving immigrant couple named Sharma, had searched for her for years until their deaths. Lorna, it appeared, was not just a neglectful mother, but a key player in the very trafficking organization that had held Lily's stepfather in its grip. An organization with tendrils that reached chillingly into activities linked to that old Market District development from Elliot's early career, a grim piece of his past unknowingly circling back. The realization was both devastating and galvanizing. Elliot now had the weapon he needed and a chilling personal connection that strengthened his resolve. 3 weeks later, the courtroom was packed. The air crackled with anticipation. Lily, looking small but no longer terrified, dressed in a simple white dress Elliot had chosen, sat nestled securely in his arms, her hand clutching his. Across the aisle, Lorna Hart, her composure now visibly frayed her eyes, darting nervously, radiated a desperate theatrical aura of aggrieved motherhood. Her accomplice, Lily's former stepfather, sat beside her, his face gray, his bravado long gone. Dr. Thorne was notably absent, her reputation in tatters and under investigation. The legal battle was short, brutal, and decisive. Elliot's lead counsel, a formidable woman renowned for her tenacity, laid out the newly discovered evidence with chilling precision, the archived missing child report for Anya Sharma, the faded hospital bracelet and star charm from Lorna's hidden box, the forensic confirmation of the identical unique birthmark on Lily's wrist, the meticulously documented trail of forged identities, and illicit financial transactions linking Lorna Hart directly to the upper echelons of the trafficking ring. Photos of Lily's injuries from her recent escape from Lorna's care were presented, underscoring the immediate danger. "Your Honor," the lawyer concluded, her voice ringing with righteous indignation, "we submit irrefutable proof that the woman known as Lorna Hart is not and has never been Lily's biological mother. This child, whose birth name is Anya Sharma, was abducted as an infant, her identity stolen, her life blighted by unimaginable cruelty. Ms. Hart is not a mother seeking custody. She is a hardened criminal, an imposter, and a central figure in a vile enterprise that preys upon the most vulnerable." A stunned, horrified silence descended upon the courtroom. Lorna Hart leapt to her feet. "Lies, all of it. He's rich, he can buy any story he wants. She's my daughter, I tell you, I raised her. That birthmark is a common mark. Those things were planted." Her voice rose to a strangled, incoherent shriek of denial, a desperate, unraveling sound that was quickly quashed by the judge's stern gavel. The evidence was overwhelming, incontrovertible. The judge, his face a mask of grim disapproval, turned to Elliot. "Mr. Grayson," he said, his voice now carrying a note of profound respect, "do you have anything further to say before this court renders its final judgment?" Elliot stood, Lily still cradled protectively in his arms. His gaze, clear, steady, and filled with an unshakable love, was fixed not on the judge, not on the cowering figures of Lorna and her accomplice, but on the small, precious child who had so miraculously found her way back to him. "Your Honor." His voice, though quiet, resonated with a raw, undeniable power filling every corner of the courtroom. "I did not give birth to this child. I share no blood with her. But," his voice thickened with emotion, "I am the one who heard her first tentative, hopeful whisper in the dead of night." I am the one who held her small trembling body when she awoke from nightmares too terrible to name. I am the one who cooked her the first breakfast she ever ate with joy, without fear. And I am the only one who wept with a father's pride, with a father's boundless love, the first time she called me Dad. He paused, taking a ragged breath, then met the judge's gaze directly. I am not asking this court to grant me permission to raise Lily or Anya as my own. I don't need a piece of paper to validate the bond between us, a bond forged in shared pain and discovered love. I am simply stating a fact, a truth that resonates in every fiber of my being. I am this child's father, in every way that truly matters. And I swear before this court, before God, before the memory of her true parents, the Sharmas, that no one will ever hurt my daughter again. Lily, tears of relief, of overwhelming joy streaming down her face, turned in his arms and flung her own small arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. Daddy, oh daddy, we can go home now, for real. The judge's voice, when it came, was clear, firm, and imbued with an unexpected warmth. It is the ruling of this court that full sole and permanent legal custody of the minor child Anya Sharma, also known as Lily, is hereby awarded to Mr. Elliot Grayson. Furthermore, Ms. Lorna Hart and her associate Mr. Hark, stepfather's name now specifically named Jedediah Cole, are to be remanded immediately into federal custody to face a raft of charges, including but not limited to child abduction, aggravated child abuse conspiracy, and multiple counts of involvement in interstate and international human trafficking. The courtroom erupted. Elliot held Lily tight, his own tears mingling with hers. He bent his head, his lips brushing her hair. "Yes, my darling girl," he whispered, his voice thick with unspeakable relief. "Let's go home. For good this time." Years passed, transformed by love and purpose. The sprawling Grayson estate, once a monument to solitary grandeur, became Anya's haven where love lives. A vibrant, sprawling sanctuary. A home filled with laughter, healing, and hope for countless children, rescued from the abyss of abandonment and abuse. Children whose souls had once trembled through cold, terrifying nights, just as Lily's once had. Billionaire Elliot Grayson, his heart finally fully at peace, passed away quietly in his sleep many years later after a long and valiant battle with illness. Before his passing, he'd often take Lily, now a young woman, to a small, quiet park that had once been the site of the derelict market where he was found. This place, Anya, he'd told her once, used to represent only endings for me. My mother's ending, my childhood's ending. But you taught me that even the darkest places can become starting points for new light. He died not alone in his silent mansion, but surrounded by the sounds of children playing in the gardens he had brought back to life. His hand still clutching a small faded photograph. A snapshot of a messy-haired girl with fiercely protective eyes holding a scruffy little dog standing defiant and hopeful at a rain-swept gate on a stormy night. He had also left her a worn leather journal. Its pages detailed not his business dealings, but his internal journey from the desolate man he had been to the father she had helped him become. The last entry read, "My dearest Anya, this blurred photograph on my wall was once my only link to a forgotten warmth. You didn't just bring warmth back. You brought sunshine, a whole garden of it. This house was stone and shadow. You made it a home. It is yours now, not as an inheritance, but as a testament. Keep the doors open. Keep the light burning." His funeral wasn't a somber private affair. It was filled with rows upon rows of children, current and former residents of Where Love Lives. Children from all walks of life, from all corners of the country, each placing a single white rose and a handwritten note upon his grave. "Thank you for not turning your back on us. Because of you, I believe there are still good people in this world. You didn't know my name, but your story, your kindness saved me. amidst the fragrant sea of white flowers. Lily Anya, now a young woman, her eyes holding the same gentle, incandescent light that had once rekindled Elliot's dormant soul, knelt quietly, her hand gently brushing the cool marble of the headstone. Before she fully embraced her role at Anya's haven, she had returned once alone with an aged shadow to the edge of Blackwood Forest. She didn't go deep, just stood where the tree line met the road, feeling the chill, hearing the wind. The fear was a ghost, but it no longer had power. Elliot's love had been a stronger shield. Now at his grave, she whispered, a soft smile gracing her lips. "You didn't leave me, Dad. You taught me how to stay. And now it's my turn not to leave the others." And so she carried on his mission, his legacy. The terrified, broken child of yesterday had become a strong, compassionate woman, her life a testament to the transformative power of love and the enduring resilience of the human spirit. Where love lives, flourished under her guidance, its reach expanding, its impact deepening. One blustery autumn afternoon, as rain lashed against the windows of the main house, echoing the distant memory of a transformative past, and the bell at the shelter gate jangled insistently, Anya, her heart giving a familiar little tug, stepped outside. There, huddled beneath the ornate wrought-iron archway, stood a skinny, soaking wet little boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, clutching the torn remnants of a cheap cartoon character t-shirt, his bare feet caked in mud, his eyes wide, hollow, and filled with a terrifying hunted fear, just as hers once had been. I don't know where to go," he stammered, his small body racked with shivers. They kicked me out, said I ate too much. I'm really, really hungry. But I didn't steal anything. I swear I didn't." His voice trailed off into a gulping sob. Anya knelt, bringing herself to his level, her gaze soft, unwavering, radiating a profound, understanding warmth. She gently, carefully placed her hand on his trembling shoulder, and she smiled, a genuine, luminous smile that reached her eyes, just as Elliot had once so long ago smiled at her. "My dad," she said, her voice a gentle melody, "used to make the most amazing fried eggs for me every single morning, especially when I was sad or scared. They were my favorite. Would you like me to make some for you?" The boy stared at her, his hollow eyes slowly filling with a dawning, incredulous hope. He nodded, a single jerky movement, his lower lip trembling. Anya gave his tiny cold hand a gentle, reassuring squeeze. "You're not a burden here," she said softly, firmly. "You're safe now. From now on, you have a home. And if you'll let me, I'd very much like to be the one who stays." The journey that Elliot Grayson had once begun alone and in pain no longer belonged to just one man or even one child. It had become a sacred, unbreakable circle where every hand once desperately held in fear would in time reach out to hold another in love. For there are people in this world who don't need to be heroically rescued with grand gestures. They just need someone, one person, not to abandon them, not to turn away. And when they are loved, truly loved at the right moment, when their fragile spark is nurtured instead of extinguished, they will inevitably grow into the ones who save others in turn. Kindness, when it is offered freely, when it is not rejected, will take root and live forever in the hearts of those who were once victims. And they, in their own time, in their own way, will become someone else's unexpected hero, just as Elliot, the lonely billionaire, had become for Lily, the stolen child. Never ever hesitate to reach out, to offer a hand, to share a moment of warmth, because sometimes the greatest, most profound salvation comes simply from your unwavering presence, from your quiet, courageous decision to stay. 186.1